There is a phrase that many of us, without exaggeration, have probably said thousands of times, and I wonder how many times you've thought about what it means. I know for myself, I said it for many years without really giving it much thought at all. And only recently, a few months ago, it dawned upon me that the words that we use are a little bit strange. After having a meal of bread, we bench, Birkas Hamazon, and in the second bracha, among other things, we thank Hashem for the land of Israel, for Eretz Yisrael. Nodeh lecha Hashem Elokeinu al she'inchalta la'avoseinu. Thank you, Hashem, our God, for giving to our ancestors, and we describe the land of Israel as follows: Eretz, Chemda, Tova, ورחבה, a land that is desired, that is good, and that is Rechava, that is wide or spacious or large. Now, of course, it makes sense to describe Eretz Yisrael as Chemda, as desired. That makes sense. Certainly, it works to describe Eretz Yisrael as Tova, as good and wonderful. But to describe Eretz Yisrael as Rechava, as wide, spacious, and large, as one of the top 3 adjectives when you're picking to describe the land, a place that is smaller in square mileage than the state of New Jersey, it seems like a little bit of an odd choice. Just a few weeks ago, one of my kids asked me to point out Israel on a map. It's hard to find. They kept pointing to the large countries surrounding it: Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan. Which one is it? And I was trying to point, no, you missed it. It's that little dot right in between all of them. You can barely see it. Can't even fit the word Israel in the country itself. They have to draw a line to somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea where it says Israel. One of my kids says, how are we ever going to visit there? We're not going to fit. It's a tiny little country. There's one adjective that really seems like a strange way to describe the land of Israel. It would be Rechava, and yet that's one of the descriptions chosen in benching. Israel isn't very large to begin with, but the little size that it has is actually in its length from top to bottom. Width, it's tiny. You can drive in a couple of hours from one side to the other. How could we? Why do we describe Eretz Yisrael in this strange way? And it didn't start with benching. It actually comes from the Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer in the Gemara says, Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, it's the Gemara in Brachos, Daf Mem Ches Amud Beis, Kol Shelo Amar, quote, Eretz, Chemda, Tova, ورחבה. Anyone who doesn't say this exact phrase, these exact words, Eretz, Chemda, Tova, ورחבה, B'virchas ha'aretz, in the second blessing of the land, in benching, Lo Yatza Yedei Chova, so you have not fulfilled your obligation of benching. It's one of the core, essential, non-negotiable parts of benching. It must be said. Eretz, Chemda, Tova, ورחבה. Why does that make sense? I looked at some of the Mefarshim on the Gemara. I didn't see anybody who was bothered by this question. There aren't that many commentaries on the bencher, at least that I have or that I know of. So I didn't know what to do. I gave it some thought on my own. Why do we describe Eretz Yisrael as a land that is Rechava, that is wide and spacious? So I want to share with you 2 answers that I came up with that I think give some insight into why not only does it make sense to describe Eretz Yisrael as Rechava, but it actually adds to our beauty and understanding the connection of this important land. In a couple of places in Sefer Yirmiyahu and Sefer Daniel, the land of Eretz Yisrael is referred to as Eretz HaTzvi, literally translated as the land of the deer. Why is it called the land of the deer? Well, the Gemara itself asks this question in a couple of places. And once is in Maseches Gittin on Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Let me give you the context of the Gemara there. One of the Amoraim says that during the time of Bayis Sheni, when the second Beis HaMikdash stood, there was a place called Har HaMelech, King's Mountain. It was a mountain in Hara Yehuda, in the mountain range of the hills of Yehuda. And the Amora says that this place, this mountain, had on it 600,000 Jewish towns. Sounds like an unbelievable number. The truth is that the Maharal says that the Gemara sometimes uses certain numbers to indicate a certain size, but it doesn't necessarily mean exactly precisely that number. 600,000 is one of those examples that he gives, that the Gemara uses 600,000 to mean many, 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 a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean exactly 600,000, but we get the point. The Gemara is trying to say there were so many towns, so many cities, so many settlements in this place called Har HaMelech. Ula is so bothered by this claim. He says, I know that area called Har HaMelech. It's not large enough for 300,000 reeds. How could it possibly fit 600,000 towns? It seems impossible. So the Gemara answers, it's Rabbi Chanina, who references this phrase, Eretz HaTzvi, found in Sefer Yirmiyahu Perek Gimel, and he explains as follows: Matzvi zeh ein oro machazikes pisaro. Just like a deer, its skin can't contain all of its flesh. I'll explain that in a moment. Af Eretz Yisrael, Bisman sheyoshvin aleha revacha. So too Eretz Yisrael. In the time when the Jewish people are settled there and living there and thriving there, it expands and it's very wide and large. Bisman she'ein yoshvin aleha gemada. But in a time when we are not settled there, it contracts and it's very small. Rashi explains that apparently the way that a deer works, fascinatingly, is as follows. That while a deer is alive, so of course its skin is able to hold within it and contain within it all of its organs and its innards and its flesh. But apparently, when a deer dies and its skin is flayed, even if you try to pack everything back into its hide, to get all of the organs and innards back into its skin and to stretch it out and to sew it back up, it wouldn't be possible. When a deer dies, its skin contracts, and you can't even figure out how everything fit there in the first place. While it's alive, it fits magically, miraculously. That's just how it's created. But once it dies, you can never pack everything back into it that was there originally in the first place. So too, Rabbi Hanina says, that's how Eretz Yisrael works. It's Eretz Tzvi. It's the land of the deer. When the Jewish people are there, living there, settled there, thriving there, when the Beis HaMikdash is standing, somehow magically, in a way that we can't even really understand, it expands. It fits all of us. It fits everything that it needs to. And during a time of galus, of exile, when it's void, when it's barren, so somehow it seems very small. It looks like just a blip on the map. You can barely even find it. It seems like a tiny country that can't even hold that many people in it. It's a miracle. It's part of the miracle of Eretz Yisrael. I think we even see a glimpse of that today. You drive on the highways in Eretz Yisrael and you see little mountains. Maybe they're not called Har Melech. Maybe they don't have 600,000 Jewish towns. But you see what seems like miraculously just settlements, towns, cities sprouting up on the sides of mountains, on the top of mountains. Somehow Eretz Yisrael seems to be expanding to fit all of the Jewish people are there. If it seems crazy, there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says that there were nisim, there were miracles that happened on a regular basis in the Beis HaMikdash. One of those miracles is that in a time when the Jewish people all made Aliyah L'Regel, on Yantif, when everybody had to go to the Beis HaMikdash, on Yom Kippur, can you imagine how many people were there? The Mishnah says that it was Omdim Tsefufim Umishtachavim Revachim. We would be standing there scrunched together. You'd be pressed against the people around you. There were so many people fitting into a small area. And yet when it came time to bow, Mishtachavim Revachim, that same word, Revachim, you would bow and there was plenty of space. All of a sudden, if you could barely stand straight, how would you be able to prostrate yourself horizontally? And yet, miraculously, magically, through the Nisim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it worked. The Beis HaMikdash, and really by extension, Eretz Yisrael as a whole, has this ability to expand, to fit in it everything that it needs. As the pasuk in Parshas Eikev describes, Lo sechzar kol ba, it lacks nothing. Anything you need, and everything it needs fits into Eretz Yisrael. Even think about the climates and the environments, from the deserts of the Negev to the green and the water of the Golan, the history and the current times, all the different types of people. This tiny little land, this tiny little country that you can barely find on a map really does truly expand to fit everything and everyone. If you ever wonder and struggle to believe, how are we all going to return there when Mashiach comes? There's 15, 16 million Jews in the world now. Is there going to be room for all of us? And the answer is, like the Gemara says, it's Eretz Hasvi. Bisman sheyoshvin aleha revacha. In the time when the Jewish people settle there, it expands and it will fit all of us. So yeah, it might look tiny on the map, but it makes a lot of sense to describe Eretz Yisrael as Eretz Chemda, Tova, ורחבה. It truly is wide and spacious when it needs to be. Here's my second answer. I'm not even sure that the question is a good one to begin with. Because the truth is, when we describe something's size, we're really describing it relative. The words big and small, wide and narrow, tall and short, are proportionate to what you are comparing it to. I'll give you a maybe silly example. Some people live in a big house and some people live in a small house. Okay, some houses are very large and some houses seem much smaller. Compare that to the words we use to describe jewelry, or to take an extreme case, a diamond. A diamond can be big and a diamond can be small. But even the largest diamond in the world is going to be much, much smaller than the smallest house in the world. If you can find a diamond that is as large as a small house, you should at least buy a bigger house, and probably a lot more than that. We use the same words, but it's a different system of measurements, it's a different way of understanding, because these things are completely different values. Somebody can have a very large apartment in New York City that's very expensive, and compared to the other apartments, quite large and spacious. It's probably still much smaller than a small ranch house in Montana. Because even though they're both places where people live, They have completely different scales of value and measurement. When describing something's size, it's all relative. So sure, if you're going to compare Eretz Yisrael to other countries around it, it is tiny. It's a speck surrounded by massive countries. If you're going to compare it to the state of New Jersey, true, it is smaller. But that's the wrong system of comparison. Eretz Yisrael is not just another country. Eretz Yisrael is not just another state. It's like comparing a house to a diamond. Those other countries, and including the country we live in, are places to live. Eretz Yisrael is Eretz HaKodesh. It's the Holy Land. It's the center of the world. It's where the Beis HaMikdash stood. It's where Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov walked. It's on a whole different scale of comparison. Even if Hashem had given us just a tiny strip of land as Eretz Yisrael, it would be like a diamond. We would travel there, to visit there, to see it, to touch it, to daven there. And yet he gave us a whole country. Yeah, compared to other countries, it's small, but who cares? Compared to diamonds, compared to its value, compared to its sanctity, compared to its kedusha, it's massive. He gave us a whole country where there's room for all of us to live in Eretz Yisrael and Eretz HaKodesh. When we understand the value of Eretz Yisrael, of even a small piece, it truly is Eretz, not only Chemda and Tova, but Vorchava. In fact, I think that's why Vorchava is last on the list. First, you have to understand and internalize and realize how Chemda it is, how desired this land is, how Tova it is, how truly good and lasting it is. And only then, once you really understand it, then you realize, wow, it's also Vorchava. And this system of measurement, according to its value when compared to diamonds, it actually truly is massive. Truth is, one of the reasons I felt so connected to this idea is because I was just proud of myself that while I was benching, I was thinking about the words. So often we just bench by rote, we read through it quickly, we know it by heart. So I was thinking, as I was benching and it caught my attention that there's a word here that seems out of place, I was proud of myself that I was thinking about what the words mean and I actually came up with a question. So I encourage you as you bench, as you daven, but we bench so regularly and we do it when we're full, so sometimes it's extra hard, to really think about the words. What do they mean? Do they make sense to you? Do we understand them? What are we saying? But specifically when you say this phrase, we're living during a time when some of us might feel a little more distant from Eretz Yisrael than we usually do. I know many people had plans to visit over the summer, and those plans were canceled. It seems like a place that's farther away than usual. But we still, of course, read about it, we care about, we daven, we talk about it, and there's so many things that happen there, especially during these times. Politics, economy, health, safety, security. We have to always remind ourselves that in as much as Eretz Yisrael also functions like just a regular country, with all of the challenges and all of the opportunities and all of the responsibilities that any country in the world has, it is fundamentally different and distinct. It's a whole different value. It's not like every other country. It's fundamentally different. When we bench and we thank Hashem every time that we eat for the gift of Eretz Yisrael that He gave to our ancestors and that He continues to give to us, we should think about the significance in all of its various descriptions and adjectives. Truly, Eretz Yisrael is Eretz, Chemda, Tova, Vorchava.